So I had the Osmo head, the Z-axis, suction cupped on the side of the side case on the motorcycle, and then I had one of the extension wires, like the 3 foot or 4 foot extension. So I'd run that up to my chest that had the controller up there so I could pan and stuff. So I was composing my shots on my phone, giving direction, and we were connected via Bluetooth on our headsets.
Cinetherapy Podcast with Sam and Mitch.
Welcome to the Cinetherapy Podcast by Inland Film Co. I'm Mitch Williams, sharing hosting duties with Sam McGhee. This is episode 14. In this week's installment, we sit down with a guest who is full of an incredible set of stories, commercial and documentary filmmaker Nathan Slabaugh. Nathan tells us stories of his life as a trumpet player in the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, how he found himself making a career out of photography and filmmaking, his documentary work with Indian motorcycles, and much more. Enjoy.
Nathan.
Yes.
Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nathan Slabaugh. I am I don't want to say filmmaker now because of the past. I'm a person who uses a camera to tell visual stories and for brands and people in the world, I guess. Yeah.
Do you normally introduce yourself as a filmmaker?
I don't know. Like when you guys brought that up in the past podcast, I thought about that a lot because it's hard. Like with titles today, I think everything you guys said was totally valid, and I've wrestled with that myself because when you say videographer, people think you like back in the VHS days, a guy with a camera at a wedding or Christmas or bar mitzvah or whatever party was a videographer, and that's not what we do anymore. And I hesitate to say filmmaker, because I don't know. I mean, when you go to a client who wants work done, they're always, I think, more impressed when you say filmmaker and trust you a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Cinematographer, I feel like if I was a DP on like a feature film, I'd call myself a cinematographer maybe, but it's, I don't know. It's whatever works for your personality, I think, and the situation that you're in, I guess. It's hard because you can't control people's perceptions on what their idea of a filmmaker is or a cinematographer or whatever. So it's hard. There's no term today. I mean, everyone is such a, like I always say, the one-man band, right? Like a lot of us do the one-man band kind of thing. It's almost a luxury when you have someone else to do a specific job, like on a shoot. So you can't tell someone you're a one-man band either, because then they think, oh, I'm getting the value version of, or like this guy's overwhelmed or, whatever. So, yeah. So I don't know. I wrestle with that, but yeah. So
that's funny that you wrestled with that again after us talking about that on the last episode. I mean, your answer though still is super pretentious. So
fair enough.
Fair enough. I like it.
What coffee are you guys drinking? My gosh.
Do you really want to know?
No, I don't care.
Okay.
It's delicious. I'll say that.
Well, right now we have two different coffees because I poured you something from earlier, but then we just filmed a different one. So.
And you're drinking the one that you filmed?
Yeah.
You didn't even pour it for the guest.
This
you had to knock me down a couple notches so I wouldn't be pretentious.
I had to knock him down a couple notches. I have more.
So
Mitch, did you want some coffee?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. It's like kind of adding to the characters, for people who don't know us. Mm-hmm. It's like an element of like me. Now I'm like diving deep in my hatred for coffee. I don't really hate it. I just don't like it.
Fair enough.
So Nathan, back to you. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I think you've been mentioned on our podcast a couple times.
Yeah, you have.
With Cam Hotchkiss and possibly Jordan. And we've wanted to talk to you in length for a while. We've ran into each other at various, places, events, some premieres of Jordan's films, and you and Sam got to know each other randomly a couple of years ago. There are a lot of stories. There are stories.
Yeah.
You were on the same flight as I was a couple of years ago to.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I didn't know who you were, and you're like writing me, "Hey, I'm on your flight," and I was like, "Whoa, okay."
That's
and
not creepy at all, is it?
No. No, but then I've heard all these great things about you. We've gotten to kind of know each other, but we have never sat down for this kind of lengthy discussion. So that's what we enjoy doing on this podcast, is getting to know people kind of more or less in a live format.
Yeah.
So
I'm excited. Yeah, I feel like we are kind of a rare species, you know, and especially in the inland Northwest. You know, it's not a movie hub per se, but it's cool to meet other people that are in the same boat as you know, because you have a lot of the same stories, you know, and same challenges. Like we were talking about taxes, I think last time we talked, because that's something as small business owners we all face. You know, it's very real. But,
yeah, and having to manage those things yourself, you know, because it's not taken out of your paycheck. Having to manage accounting and making sure it's all buttoned up properly, and you know. Anyways, yeah, it's we are a rare breed. I know there are plenty of other people out there freelancing in some other, you know, form, whether it's wedding photography or graphic design or you know, that have similar struggles, but this specific to film, I think we can relate to one another.
Yeah, and like even being a filmmaker or a storyteller, I think there's such a I mentioned this with Jordan, but there's kind of a wanderer vibe that you get out of that, knowing that someone is a filmmaker. Like for you, for instance, I don't know much about you, but I keep hearing all these stories about. I know you have done a lot of motorcycle films. I want to hear about those. I've heard your history, a little bit of history with the Circus. I see you're doing like videos for magicians. I'm seeing. I hear about like the trumpet. I'm hearing all these stories that are all over the place, and then you walk in and you're this big bearded dude. And I told my wife this morning that you remind me of Hagrid. Like you just come out of nowhere, and I want to know. I want to be around this person. I need to get to know you.
Oh,
so
cool.
And you're just fun. You have a good jolly spirit about you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
No, I appreciate that. That's wow. What do you want to know?
I don't know. What do we start with? We mentioned the circus. You mentioned the circus. I mean, do you think that that's just like?
It's a good starting point. I mean,
it might keep people on the episode.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The stuff Sam and I talk about is just boring. Accounting, taxes. My gosh. Okay.
No, I don't know. I think it's so the way I'll frame like my background is like a lot of people who do this now for a living didn't necessarily go to film school, which I think is really cool, and that is my story as well. You know, like I started out as a musician, right? So I went to college for music performance and music education at Temple University in Philadelphia, and so that was my trajectory, right? Is going to I got to study with the guys in the Philadelphia Orchestra. I was freelancing as a trumpet player in the Philadelphia area, and then did all my student teaching and stuff on top of that. And in the summers, I was playing at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg there. So got to dress up in lederhosen and play in the fest house there and playing elf horn as well as my trumpet and all that fun stuff. So what got me from there to the circus was I taught public school for a year out of college. It was in Newport News Public Schools. I taught choir and general music in a middle school there in Newport News. And it was a rough first year. I was like, you know, I mean, anybody's first year teaching, like any teacher will tell you that first year is brutal. I don't know. And I was fortunate to have really great colleagues that like kept me from, I still remember there's a specific day, it was like October 23rd, I think it was. I was like ready to walk out of the school and just drop it and walk away and said, I can find something else to do, and but they kept me, they like talked me down from the from the edge, and I stuck it out the rest of the year, and there was good stuff that happened that year, but so I resigned from my position there, looking for like an elementary school position or like a high school band position or something.
Were you teaching middle school?
Mm-hmm.
Or okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, middle school, general music and choir,
Okay,
so
cool.
6th, 7th, and 8th grade, there. And then that summer I played at Busch Gardens again. It's like, man, I miss playing my horn and getting paid to play. And a friend of mine had come off a Broadway tour, and so she had a list of phone numbers for like Broadway tours, cruise ships, and the Circus was on there, Ringling Brothers. And so I called every single number on the list, said, hey, I'm a trumpet player looking for work. And Ringling called back, like, I think that day or the next day or whatever, and they said, we're actually looking for a trumpet player. And I was like, okay. So then I talked to the band leader quite extensively. They faxed the music, auditioned over the phone the next day, and I remember going to William and Mary College there and going to one of the practice or the classrooms in the School of Music at William and Mary, and like setting my phone on one side of the room and like going on the other side and setting up the music and like playing my audition, And so eventually they ended up offering me the job, and I had the stipulation I told them, right up front, it's like I have a contract at Busch Gardens till the end of, I think it was August. And so it's like, I can only leave this job then. So that was like 3 weeks that they would have to cover. And initially said, and then finally they're like, okay, we'll get somebody out there to sub for you until you come out. And so I bought an RV and a motorcycle and drove from Virginia, dropped my stuff off in Pennsylvania, and then out to Montana to Great Falls was my first town with the show. And yeah,
That's incredible.
And so I did that for 6 years, and it changed. I mean, it's an incredible life experience. Like, it's still, I remember during the time, I was like, I feeling like it was such an intense experience that it'd take a lot of time to decompress from that. And there's still like things, whereas I don't know, like, things chug along in your mind, and you like kind of, it frames it differently, now that I left in 2011, so it was eight years ago, I guess. So you have different perspective, but it was an amazing life experience. It changed me. Yeah, for sure.
Wow. And that was Ringling?
Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey.
And they're no longer
correct
running.
Sadly, no. So when I joined them, they had 3 units. 2 units, the red and the blue, traveled by train. They called the Silver Snail, and it was a mile-long train. At that time, it was the largest privately owned train, I think, in North America, if not the world, maybe. And all the animals and people and everything traveled by train. And then our unit was the smaller of the 3, called the Gold unit. And our unit was designed to go to towns that had smaller venues or where the tracks didn't go necessarily. So we played everything from like Ottumwa, Iowa, which is a little town in southeastern or southern central Iowa, I guess, all the way to like Memphis, So sometimes we would cover the towns that the big shows used to play, because it was cheaper to put our show in there and move the show there and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, but it was pretty amazing. I got to visit the big shows on occasion, the parallel universe. They call it a town without a zip code, right? Because, we had on the show, so to be clear, I played trumpet in the band, right? They had live music, and we were all union musicians, so I joined the union and was part of that. And on the big shows, they had 9 musicians. On our show, they had 6. And so I was the only trumpet player on our show. We had myself on trumpet, the band leader was a sax player, and then we had a bass player, 2 keyboards, and drums is what we had for our show. So
wow.
But yeah, they call it a town without a zip code because we had a school, with the teacher that traveled with us. We had daycare. You had everything that goes with the town, and then a show, on top of that. So production manager, you had a lot manager for, stuff. And we all traveled by RVs, so there was that aspect of life. And then we were kind of in charge of getting ourselves from town to town. So it was a different town every week, and sometimes we play 2 towns a week. So yeah, it was.
And was there ever time off?
Rarely. I mean, we'd maybe get a week to 2 weeks off a year. If we had an exceptionally long jump, like there were, I know those 6 years, there were 2 summers that we played Coney Island up in New York. And it was a big deal because they rented a tent from England, and it was the first time Ringling had played under a tent in, I don't know, 70 years or something crazy like that. So like Mayor Bloomberg was the mayor at the time, so he came out for opening night, and so I got to play like New York for Mayor Bloomberg, which was kind of cool, one of those weird moments. But that was fun, and we were in one place then for like 3 months at a time, 3.5 months, but. It was rough because we were doing like 12 shows a week, and so we'd get Monday and Tuesday off and then start with 3 shows on Wednesday, which I always called the punch in the face, because you get 2 days off and then you come back and have to play 3 shows. That's 6 hours of playing, with the horns like on your face, and so I call it the punch in the face because it's like you come back from 2 days off and you're just exhausted. The only thing you did for the 2 days, like the first day you just sleep, and the second day you might get out and try to sightsee, New York. Like my second summer I was there, I was actually dating a girl, and so we'd go out and try cocktail places. That was the thing I really enjoyed, was coffee and cocktails, and so we'd go out and try all the different cocktail places in New York if we could get in. Some of them were reserved, this would have been like 2010. But we got in some pretty like exclusive ones. There was one called, was it PD? No, Milk and Honey, which at that time, if anybody out there is in the cocktail world, they know that Milk and Honey around that era was like, there was one in London and one in New York, and you had to be like a member, and it was crazy. But that was that was probably like my all-time cocktail experience. But I don't. I could talk about cocktails and coffee for a long time, but I don't know if people want to hear.
No, that's fantastic. I think since we're talking about the circus, though, we got to hear some crazy stories. I mean, that's 6 years. There's got to be something.
Yeah. So you said it took a long time to decompress from that, and you still haven't fully.
There was just stuff where you would like, your normal would be different than everybody else's normal. Like I always, after a couple of years, I kind of came up, with the idea that if you want to get to, the quickest way to get to know a town is to go into the Walmart and go into a laundromat. Those 2 places will give you the vibe of that town very quickly. That's the fastest way to get to know a town, because the people that frequent those places will tell you, a lot about a town. But it's I don't know. It's hard because you just like you see so much. I remember it was also interesting too, like how you learn how much people have like preconceived ideas about things. And they're like, for example, if I go get my haircut, like I didn't look like this at the time because we had to keep the appearance we were hired on with, so like no beards, short hair. It was in the contract. When you're a performer, it's like all of that's written into your contract. So I didn't look like this, so I get haircuts and stuff, and I remember in the barbershop, they always chit chat with you and say, oh, what do you do? You say, I'm a musician. Oh, what kind of music do you play? Well, I tour. Like, oh, who you tour with? And so eventually come around to the circus, and they're like, oh, well, it's good that you're doing that while you're young. And that always like peeved me when people would say that, because they didn't realize that, there were a lot of families on the show. Like being a single guy, I was actually in the minority. Like most of the acts were family acts, and so they had kids of all different ages. And it was great because, those kids got to see, it was mostly international on the show. There were about 11 different nationalities on the show at any given time. So again, being an American, I was in the minority, and it was great. So you had all these different kids that spoke different languages. Like I remember one kid, her parents were jugglers, and they also rode a motorcycle on a wire. And she was like, couldn't have been more than 2 or 3, but I remember one town in Sarasota when we played there, all our dressing rooms are pretty close together because of the Robarts Arena there. It's very small. It's not made for like big shows, but we played there because of the history of Sarasota. And that was a big deal too. That was the first time Ringling had played in Sarasota in, I don't know, 50, 80 years, something weird like that. But this little girl went around to all the dressing rooms, and she said, the women's dressing room, obviously, and said, hello in the language that went with each of the ladies in the room, and it just shows that like, it's cool, and that the kids, they would soak that up, and then get to do field trips, and then the school was right there, and then anybody's house they would go play with, like all the parents knew each other, so the kids weren't going to get away with anything, so they go to the other person's RV and play after the show or before the show or whatever, and so it was a great place to raise a family, but people from the outside, they look at it as like I don't know, like this irresponsible, or because it didn't fit their normal lives. We ran into that a lot, where it's like your life was so different from theirs that they couldn't understand that the way of life that you were doing was a responsible thing. So yeah,
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Like going back to what was normal for me, you kind of lose perspective, because like there were weeks where I'd be parked, and I remember one week they had this giant steel wheel where the guys would walk on either end in the wheel, like that was parked outside my RV window, and so they were practicing during the week. So I'd see this wheel, I'd be in there drinking my coffee or checking my email or whatever, and see a wheel going around. There'd be other weeks where I was like parked next to the tigers, and so the tigers would be like 20 feet outside my window, and so when they get hungry, they make this very distinct it's like a very primal sound when they would get, like, you would know when the tigers are hungry, and so just stuff like that where you'd it was just like, and too on the music side of things, I mean, circus playing music is its own type of playing. Like anyone who's played in the circus world, they'll tell you it's different from any other kind of playing that you do, just because of the considerations. It's a live show, and especially with animal acts, you work to the animals. So there were points in the music where the band leader would be given, like they call it an air 2. So you give 1, 2, boom, and then you go on to the next section. So you have sections that are for each part of the animal act, were a certain thing that they were supposed to accomplish, and there were times when the animals didn't feel like working, so we'd vamp for a long time, but it was and the other things too, like I remember like the tigers, they would usually come in during intermission, because they'd bring the cages in and then let them all in the ring, and then turn the cages around so that when they go out, the cages are all set to go in the right direction. So that would usually be intermission, would be the best time to do that. And I remember early on that tour, like seeing stuff that was sprayed like on my music stand and my music. I was like, what is this? And finally I stood like when watched during one intermission, and the tigers, like someone had always told me, like, if you see a tiger's tail go up, like, get out of the way, because they have a range of like 20 or 30 feet with their piss. Yeah. And so they, like, if you see a tail go up, get out of the way. And sure enough, that's what was happening. They were pissing on my music, like, every time. I think they would do it for fun, because it became this thing where they would come out and they would turn, and sure enough, and like one of the keyboard players, so that year they had the bandstand divided on either side of the portal, and same thing with the keyboard player. He'd come out and his keys were like sticky, and he was so pissed, So I learned my lesson to turn my music stand around, so my music, like the music stand, I don't care if it get hit, but I didn't want my music full of tiger piss, so it's like
tiger piss.
Tiger piss.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of life experience.
That's going in the title for this epised.
Yeah.
Tiger piss.
Yeah. So there was a lot of different stuff, and we'd have parties too, and that was kind of fun. We had this thing called the punch party, so where everyone would make the punch, and it got to be pretty elaborate. Like we'd go to the dollar store and buy a bunch of crap and like hot glue it and paint it gold for the difference. So we had like, one best taste, worst taste, and most alcoholic, and like people would like really get into it. Like we had one year, the act, it was a crossbow act, and then she did aerials and he did crossbow, they were from Finland, and they were awesome. I love them. Yeah, Marty and Lena is who it was. And so their punch was called Blackwater. And so in RV, you have gray water and black water, right? Black water being the sewage and gray water being like your stuff that you wash in your sink and that kind of stuff. And so they devised this thing where it was their trailer. They built like a scale model of their trailer with like a container inside for the punch, and then had a little RC truck. And then at the official presentation, because then people would have the punches throughout the night, but then there was a point where the judges would walk through. We appointed judges from, like, if it was one of the promoters for that town, and then other people. And so they went all out. They had the scale model, their travel trailer, and then their fifth wheel, I should say, and then their RC truck. and they had built a cardboard box and put smoke effects in it. So one of the judges came through, and they had music from their act that they put in the background. And so when the judges came, they played the music, and the RC truck came out with the smoke effects, and then they, had at the bottom back of the fifth wheel where you would have your black water. That's where you would get your punch, and they would serve it. It was pretty amazing. Yeah. But one of the things, going back to like bringing it back to storytelling and kind of like what I do now, during that time, it was cool because, with the food, there was such a diversity of people and foods. So anytime there would be like a birthday or some weird holiday I'd never heard of and from a different country, like they would have the celebration and they make this kind of food, and it would be awesome because, we get to taste stuff that was an approximation with the ingredients, that we have here, but these different flavors. And so myself and the seamstress on the show, we did a cookbook for two of the different tours where we kind of told the story of the circus through food and had people, if they wanted to contribute recipes and stuff. So that was kind of fun I always wanted to publish it, but someone had told me that who's in that world, it's like, unless you're like a TV celebrity on the Food Network, like cookbooks don't sell. So it's like you'd be wasting. So we did enough we printed enough at like Kinko's or whatever for people on the show that wanted to order one, but yeah.
That's cool. Do you still have it?
Oh yeah. And I use it sometimes too.
You should create a digital version.
We thought about it. Yeah.
Just like put it out there.
Make it like an ebook or something.
Yeah, ebook and like PDF.
Yeah. Or even do like a blog style.
Ringling recipes. I don't know. You might get.
Yeah, we couldn't use their name. They're like Feld Entertainment is super litigious. So.
But this is. I mean, it's just. I get the feeling. I get the impression that you were kind of set up for being a storyteller. Like you've just you bought an RV and a motorcycle and you just took off.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, it's one of those things where it was like a sink or swim thing, right? Because like I didn't, you have a 30-day time when they can say, it's not working out. I forget what they call it. Not trial. Is it trial period? What am I thinking of?
Yeah,
anyways,
it makes sense. Yeah.
30-day, so they could have said after 30 days, like, it's not working out. Thank you, and send you on your way. So it was a risk to like, go all in. But I don't know. It was just one of those things where you just kind of like jump into it, and you say it's either going to work or not, and find something else. So that was, I think you always have like a couple defining points in your life where you have to like make a choice, in a certain direction, and that was one of those. And leaving the circus was another one of those choices where it was like, I was making a really good money on the circus as a union musician, but I was really burnt out, because we were traveling all the time, and like the trumpet thing, it was like super stressful just because you're playing a lot, and if you get sick or if you kind of back yourself into a corner, like playing wise, like if you push really hard on a show and then you kind of pay for it the rest of the week or whatever, it's like, you're hurting and you have a microphone at the end of your bell, and if you feel crappy or your lips are puffy or whatever, it's like you have a couple thousand people that have a front row seat to all that, and that really messes with your head, so it was a lot of anxiety, towards the end. And so finally it's just like, I had to come to the realization of like, what is my identity? It was as a trumpet player, as a circus trumpet player, and kind of what I came down to was like, it's a creative person, right? It's like getting that creative impulse out in some way. And like I think I was telling you earlier, Mitch, like in the circus, you're paid to play the same thing the same way day in and day out, which it takes a certain skill set, but it's not very creative. And so you kind of have to find outlets. And for me at that time, it was a podcast. I started a coffee podcast at that time, and that was like a saving grace for me, because that like gave you something on your days off to do. So I'd ride my motorcycle around and try out coffee or mocha lattes, in that particular case, and interview people and stuff. And the other side, and so going back to like, finding like my identity is surrounded as like a creative person, like needing to get that out. I was starting to take up photography at the time, and the Nikon D90 came out right around that time.
Yeah.
That was the first DSLR to shoot video, HD video, and stills, and so that was my first like DSLR camera that I got, and that kind of launched me into that. And it was cool because, traveling so much, you always have new stuff to shoot. And then like people on the show, I had all these beautiful people that I worked with that, part of shooting anything is like if people trust you, right? And so when you're working with your friends, obviously they trust you. So it makes it really fun to do photo shoots. And so if you're in like some crazy cool location, like one of the girls in the horse act, we went and I found this like abandoned water park in Texas. And so we went and like shot cool pictures at this abandoned water park in Texas, which was so much fun. And it was like really stretching, and it like, and it made you like want to search stuff out, So I did like a shoot when we were down in Texas in Corpus Christi. I had this idea to do like a ballerina and elephant shoot. And so we didn't have a ballerina on the show. And at that time I was trying to like go through like Model Mayhem or find, something somewhere. And so I contacted the ballet in Corpus Christi, and they sent somebody over. And so I think it was a more inexperienced ballet dancer, because I think it was one of the board members' daughters rather than someone from the actual ballet. But the picture still turned out great, and those are some really fun pictures that have this like giant, 10,000 pound elephant and this dainty ballerina. It's a really fun contrast, so stuff like that, like you probably wouldn't get to do anywhere else. It was kind of fun to stretch and just kind of like, I don't know, it stretched that creative side of like, what can you do? So like the film, I wasn't doing a ton of video at that time. It was more photography, but the video came after I left the circus.
Everything you're saying, like I'm visualizing. It's like you're really good at painting a picture of all of these different places you were at and the different photographs that you took. And I want to see all these pictures
for sure. Yeah I'll send you a bunch of them. You can check them out.
So how did you end up, like, give me a quick view of how you got into, like, are you a full-time filmmaker right now? So how did you go from the circus? And I see like the start of, you bought a camera and you started taking these photos. How did you get into filmmaking?
Well, it was, so when I knew I was going to leave the show, I saved up some money for like a buffer, just to like take a couple months where I wouldn't have to work if I didn't want to, just to like, again, like decompress. And so I jumped off the road in over in Seattle, in Kent. Kent was our last town that we played, and there was a long-term RV place over there. And so that was great. It was, and so that was where I jumped off. And a friend of mine, who was a headliner on the show, an illusionist, he also he worked with parrots, and so him and his wife had a parrot training business online that was pretty successful, and so he wanted to do a 12-part kind of reality TV series where it's called One Day of Miracles, where they go in and like figure out what the problem with the parrot is and then solve it, through either through like food or training or whatever, because these parrots, they live 60-70 years and have the intelligence of like a 4-year-old. And so a lot of people don't realize that when they just want like a pretty bird. And it's like when you have a pet and an animal with that kind of intellectual ability, they need stimulation, they need something to do. They're like, they can't just be in a cage all day and say things. And so anyways, so that was like, again, jumping off in the deep end, like I had never filmed a series before. I'd never done any of that stuff. And so that was like a big, I don't know if I'd say a big risk, but I mean, we were friends, so there was a little bit of a buffer there as far as like, it was a little bit easier. So it was somebody that we knew each other well, and had shot a little bit of video like when we were on the show, just like a couple promo things and stuff. But yeah, that was my first introduction into like really filming and making, something that was going to be published and put out there. And so they sold that as a training series, and I think it seems pretty successful. I think they're still selling it, 7-8 years later. But
I'm gonna go buy this series
and get a parrot. You want a 4-year-old in your house for 60 years?
Yeah.
It's the first thing I thought of.
For 60 years.
When he said that, I was like, why would
Nope.
you buy a parrot? I have a 4-year-old already. And I
Put wings on that 4-year-old, and there you go.
Oh my goodness, he basically already has
Give him a
wings.
beak.
He basically already has wings.
Yeah.
That is true.
Gosh.
That is true.
And eats the same thing every day.
He's a parrot.
He's a parrot. That's hilarious. Gosh. So that series is he still sells?
Yeah, I believe so. Last time I checked, it was still.
Are you
on the
getting residuals on this?
No.
On these sales? My gosh.
No. I didn't know anything about anything back then. Yeah. So but I'm happy that it's been successful for him and for them.
I'm going to replace your coffee really quick. One of the things that Mitch loves to do is sip right up in the microphone.
Oh no.
He does this to me.
It's just funny to me
Thank you.
because Sam always has to listen
Cheers.
to that sound.
Cheers. So every time I'm doing a sound check, every time I'm doing sound check, if it's podcast, if it's on set for a corporate video, if it's documentary interview, whatever, Mitch gets in the interview seat and grabs. Normally it's his big giant water bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a LaCroix. It just gives me a nice little... And so I've learned, if I ask Mitch to do the sound check for me, leave your headphones off and just let him get that out first.
It's the 4-year-old in me.
It's the 4-year-old.
It shows that he cares.
He does care.
Yeah.
And then there are times when I'll be going through, we filmed in a commercial kitchen one time, the chocolate videos for Pilgrims. I sent you off with the audio recorder to get Foley sound in the kitchen. And we reminded ourselves that, okay, so the big commercial fridge door opening, and I just needed the sound of the fridge door opening and closing, but what I got was the hinges, the latch from the outside, the latch from the inside, the latch, and then in the end, he whispered into it really loud, and I was listening to this. I didn't know that he had done all this, and so as I'm listening through, we're sitting you can see our desks over here, facing each other.
Mm-hmm.
Mitch has got headphones on. I've got headphones on. We're both working, and I'm listening to him whisper. I'm shivering, and it's scary. And then he's like, "What's going on over there?" Nothing. Just going through your sound of the kitchen, and he knows exactly what I've got in my ears.
I was being diligent. I was coming up with all sorts of sounds, and I'm not going to say his name, but the guest that we're recording tomorrow, who knows when it will be published, but he would have been very proud of me.
He would have been very proud of you. That's true.
He would have
That's
been very proud of me.
Is it like AMSR? Is that what that is?
ASMR.
ASMR. Sorry,
I don't even know what that stands for, but
it's auditory. I don't know either actually, but
that's basically what it is.
Yeah.
There's a Pilgrims Fresh Market out in Coeur d'Alene. They have an urban garden right behind the store. So a lot of the, for example, the spinach that's in the store was grown right outside, and we were making a video to show off. We were making an ad to show off the spinach that's being grown right outside. So we went out there, and Mitch has the microphone, and he holds it right up to the spinach. He goes, "This is the sound of spinach growing," and then holds it up there. And I'm just watching him walk around getting sounds. And I'm like, I'm gonna have to listen through all this later. Oh my gosh!
You could. I think you have an idea for a new channel there, Mitch. Yeah, doing AMSR. It's mainstream now. I've seen mainstream commercials that tap into that, like stuff on network TV where they're doing AMSR kind of stuff. It's gone. It's a thing.
On our YouTube channel, we do have a playlist titled Extras, and so far we have Mitch's wife Sydney has done a lot of the voiceovers for a lot of the ads we've done, and we will oftentimes just put a camera on her when she's doing a voiceover, because a lot of the times she's got a lot of cuts that are just
funny.
She'll say something slightly wrong, she'll cuss because it was okay, whatever, and she'll get right back into it. So we'll throw up that whole video on the Inland Extras playlist. We might have to just start doing Mitch's. Is it ASMR? AMSR, whatever it is.
I don't know.
That
shows how little we know about it.
Exactly. We don't even know what it is. Okay, I do want to know when you and I first started talking. You were doing a coffee documentary, and you asked, "How did you hear about me?" Because I was freelancing. Mitch and I weren't working together yet. You asked if I'd go to a coffee farm. I can't remember where, and we never ended up going, but I've always known you as the guy that was doing coffee documentaries.
Yeah, so I think that was the Nicaragua one that we did. So the way I got into coffee documentary stuff was, so that particular project was for World Coffee Events, which at that time was part of the Specialty Coffee Association. Was it America? I don't know. They've merged since then, and now it's just all the Specialty Coffee Association. So basically, it's a trade, like a 501c6. So it's like I call it like a trade group. So like anybody from mom and pop coffee shops all the way up to Starbucks can be members of that, and they do a big trade show every year. Different places, they do one in America, and then they do them all over the world. And there's different coffee associations. So the one of Europe and the U.S. merged, but they have one for Asia, they have one for Africa, one for Japan, SCAJ. Anyways, all that to say, the way I got into that was during the Circus when I was doing my coffee podcast. It was and traveling around and tasting mocha lattes. Like I said, I interview people, and so you cross paths with people, and so I would try to go to coffee cuppings and so particular counterculture coffee was up and coming at that time out of North Carolina, and I'd been to a couple of their training centers because they would do like tastings every Saturday morning, and you go in and they teach you a little bit about their coffees, and then you do public cupping. So for people that are watching, that don't know, a cupping is kind of like wine tasting, where you have the different coffees in a cup, and you pour water, and then you scoop out the grinds, and then you do what's called slurping, which is a very distinct thing, and there's special spoons for cupping. But all that to say, it's really fascinating, and it's fun to educate yourself on like what flavors there are, because a lot of times we don't pay attention to that stuff, and so I'll I better not digress into coffee. We could be here a long time. So those relationships that I formed through that time came back around. So after I left the Circus, I was working on that. To bring you up to that, I was working on that project. I was at Silverwood for the summer because he brought me up with Silverwood. He was performing there, and so we were still working on the project. Plus, he was working on behind the scenes of performing with parrots at Silverwood. So I had my RV up there and was working, and ended up Silverwood hired me on. I was working directly with the owner there. He saw some of my stuff and got to make some films for him. And
to clarify, Silverwood is an amusement park that's located up in Athol, Washington, or Athol, Idaho.
Yeah, and it's huge. It's unbelievable that we have something that cool up here.
It's like a micro Disneyland.
It's in the middle of nowhere. You're driving, up and through wilderness and in mountains and stuff in North Idaho, and then all of a sudden you see roller coasters, and you're like, "What?" Like
roller coasters.
It doesn't
and
make
giant
sense.
Water slides.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Anyways, I just wanted to clarify for anyone that might be unfamiliar.
That's good thinking.
Anyways, keep going.
So Silverwood, and then from there, the Specialty Coffee Association had me. They were kind of scaling up their content and what they were doing, and they were looking for someone to do video and kind of head up their symposium events and the capture and editing and publishing of that. And so I knew some of the people, and we talked for a bit, and they asked me to come on full time. So I got to work remote from up here for that, and then would just fly to events, a couple times a year, and the coffee documentaries were a part of that. They were looking for video content for some of their smaller symposium style events, stuff that would fit a speaker slot, like a 15 to 20 minute slot. And so we, had pitched a lot of ideas of what would be relevant to that audience, and so the first one we did was on sustainable. It was workers and kind of the sustainability, like what are coffee farmers getting paid, but beyond coffee farmers, what are their workers? Because a lot of times you'll have the owner of a coffee farm, but then they hire workers below them, and so not only does with the way and it's a really big topic, and it's not only the coffee farmers usually not getting their cut compared to what we pay for the coffee after it's roasted and bagged to us. The coffee farmers see very little of that, and then the workers usually see even less of that. So we were down there trying to highlight with Kim Elena Bullock, who is the sustainability coordinator for the SCA, and trying to highlight what some of the farms that were doing it right, and why it worked, and like just hearing some of the workers' challenges and stuff like that. So that was the first one. And then I got to do another one where we talked about coffee processing, and and there was one in between there about coffee and design, specifically Nordic design, and kind of like how Nordic, every coffee shop now that's open has a very Nordic, a little bit of that IKEA, very Nordic feel. And so we were exploring the idea of, does Nordic design become a indicator of quality coffee? And that was probably 5 years ago, but when people see a coffee shop with that style design, does that indicate to that person that they're going to go in there and have a good cup of coffee, and how those two things intersect? So that was fun, because we filmed that over in Copenhagen and Sweden, and we had a conference and a symposium over there, so we got to dovetail the filming. We stayed like an extra 3 or 4 days, I think. So there was that one. So I got to do a couple, and then the one, like I was telling you, the coffee processing one was down in Costa Rica and El Salvador, and that was exploring just newer methods of coffee processing. There's a thing right now where they're taking strains of yeast from the wine industry. So like coffee, just to give you like a super quick rundown of what happens, they pick the beans, right? It comes in a cherry, right? So the two beans sit like this, and it's a coffee cherry. And so they take the outside cherry part off, which tastes delicious, and you can dry it out, and you can make tea out of it. It's called cascara, and I've had some cascara. Evans Brothers here in town has cascara, and you can actually make a reduction of it and put it in with like carbonated water and make an amazing like carbonated drink in the summertime. It's delicious.
A shrub.
Highly recommend it. Yeah. And so the coffee bean, coffee cherry, and so they take the cherry part off, and so and then on the beans there's like this mucilage, which is like a sugary substance, and you have to get that off somehow. And so usually fermentation is a way of doing that. You can let it dry, and there's different variants of that. You get into what are called honey processes, which I won't go into that, but
I love this so much.
Is really exciting stuff happening with coffee processing between the honeys, and then using yeast strains from the wine industry to control fermentation, because usually it's just they let it ferment out. So whatever organisms are in the air, in that tank, in the people's hands, all that is what they were just letting ferment, which is not a bad thing, but you can't control that. So when you introduce certain strains of yeast, you get into being able to have like your fermentation will be exactly 8 hours, right? Because a lot of times weather will affect it, and all that kind of stuff. And so knowing that you have an 8-hour fermentation for a coffee farmer during a harvest season, when they have a certain window to get all the crop in and get those cherries turned around and processed, having an 8-hour window, and knowing that for sure is a much more efficient and way of processing than saying, well, it could be 6, it could be 12.
Yeah.
Depends on how hot or cold it is that night, if it rains and all that kind of stuff. And there's certain flavor characteristics too that you start to get by experimenting with different strains. Yeah. So Scott Labs was one of the ones that was working with Scott Labs out of California was working with some of the farms down in Costa Rica and El Salvador that we're looking at. So
see, all this stuff interests me. It's very cool. I just don't like it's if we get into whiskey, scotch, if we get into beer, we learned a lot about hops.
Yeah.
In our time down with Balebreaker.
Yeah, that footage looks amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm excited to see the final products of that.
Yeah, we're almost done with it. I want to come back into the
I
coffee
do too,
for a second.
I don't want to try to dovetail to
Right.
what we did.
Right.
I want to hear more about
I'm
it.
excited about that because I think for us, I think we are making a brand film for the brewery, but we would like to, we did talk with their marketing person about turning it into something longer form that could maybe go to
Something
festivals.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. But it killed me that I wasn't able to go on that trip with you. You were the first person that called and was like, "Hey, would you do this?" And my wife and I were newly married, and I was like, "I want to go do this, but I can't." And I wasn't able to go on it with you. And then, like, so after that, when did you get what did you do next after all this coffee stuff? What are you doing now?
So I got to a point there where I wanted to do kind of more projects, and they were starting to scale back a little bit because it's one of those things where I was, and like growing in my abilities and what I was learning to do, and as you grow, and gain new skills, you want to do new things and other stuff, and they weren't at a point where they were ready to grow. They had just had a merger, and there's like a lot of internal politics and just kind of that corporate mentality, and so it was just one of those things where I felt like it was time for me to, like, I was starting to, I guess, kind of butt heads a little bit, because I had all these ideas of things I want to do. They're like, and it's like, it's fine. It's totally their call. Like I don't have any bad feelings about it, but so it was time for me to step away, and so that's what I did. And so kind of taking, like, when leaving the circus, you're leaving like a salary with benefits and going and back and doing freelance, which was kind of a scary thing, because we had a kid on the way, and that's, having kids makes things a lot more complicated and puts a little bit more pressure on you. But it's been, from that, we did the motorcycle thing for Indy, and I think the next spring, that came around, and that was it was a blessing, really, just amazing opportunity to do that. And things have grown steadily,
So how did you get into the Indian motorcycles videos that you were making?
So that was through two friends of mine that are motor journalists. They have a company called West by 1000, and so Justin and Kira, Justin Coffey and Kira Sekdalan, and they've both, like, Justin has done, he worked for TourTech, which is a aftermarket motorcycle aftermarket parts brand. And he had done a lot of marketing and social media stuff for them, and so they kind of they're awesome. This awesome duo where they do magazine articles, pieces of content for everything from, like, they'll go to car launches, like they went to, like, a Lamborghini. He has some crazy stories about just different these press launches that they do, especially for the car industry. Like, cars have way more money than motorcycles do. So, like, he was at a press launch for, like, a Lamborghini thing where they, like, give him a Lamborghini to drive out to Palm Springs for like 3 days, and it's like crazy stories. But all that to say, they're in that industry and they have a lot of connections. And so they were at the Burt Munro, the guy in The Fastest Indian. I want to say his grandson or, like, great grandnephew or someone from New Zealand. They wanted to try to recreate Burt Munro's land speed record out at the Salt Flats, the Bonneville Salt Flats. And so there was a big press event, and so Justin was out there for that and covering that, and just through conversations out there and pitching the idea of, he had the idea, they have Indian Scouts, and they had done a couple of magazine articles about one called Scouts Honor, where they rode the Scouts from coast to coast. Because in that world, a lot of people think you need, like, a big, like, beggar kind of bike that's just huge to be able to do trips, and so they wanted to show that you could take these, smaller bikes, but they're still very agile and capable of doing long miles on them. And anyways, so through that and the conversations and pitched it, they eventually we pitched 6 video pieces, and they ended up going for 3. So that's what we did. Yeah. The series is called, so it's Perpetual Motion is the name of the series. So if you go on YouTube and look up Perpetual Motion and then West by 1000, so West X 1000. Yeah. And you'll see their channel, and then all the episodes are up there. So, yeah. So it's 3 episodes, and each one's about 25 to 28 minutes long. So it's about, if you put them all together, it'd be like a feature film length
that was like
content.
A couple years ago that you were
Yeah, that was spring of 2018.
18, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I
What
remember
was
when
the
you
second
were
one? West.
West by 1,000.
Yeah,
West by 1,000.
yeah. So West X.
Were
1000.
you writing as well for the trip?
Oh yeah, I wish we would have had a behind the scenes person, because that would have been some of the stuff that we were doing was like pretty wild. So we started off in Mexico, right? So we did, for those 3 episodes, the first one we went from
Right.
San Diego down into Baja Norte, Mexico, and then back up into the U.S. And then the second episode was from like Arizona down through Texas, all through Texas, and we did like a huge loop, like 2,000 miles in Texas or whatever. Third episode was Texas to Daytona Beach, Florida, down via New Orleans and up through Alabama and Georgia. And so yeah, the whole time it was just, that was one of the cool things. So a lot of times you'll see motorcycle content or documentaries, and they'll have a chase vehicle. So it's like, a couple guys on a bike, and then there'd just be like this giant van that has everything you need to fix a motorcycle, and like drinks and snacks and equipment and all that kind of stuff, like literally a couple of 100 yards behind them. So it's like, in some sense, I mean, yeah, they're getting to ride the motorcycle, and like a good, riding a motorcycle is always a good thing. But as far as like making, content, like that, it was just the 3 of us on bikes, so I had all my equipment on the bike, and I devised a system of filming. So basically, the way I got my chase shots was the DJI Osmo.
Yeah.
And they basically, I bought one of the Z-axis things. So I had the Osmo head, the Z-axis, suction cupped on the side of the side case on the motorcycle, and then I had one of the extension wires, like the 3-foot or 4-foot extension. So I'd run that up to my chest that had the controller up there, so I could pan and stuff. And then I had the phone was my monitor, so it connects via Wi-Fi. So I was composing my shots on my phone, giving direction, and we were connected via Bluetooth in our headsets. So I was directing them in our headsets, while we were writing. It's like, okay, a little closer, okay, back off, no, a little bit to your left, okay, right there, that's the frame. And it's like, okay, speed up, right there. And so we'd be riding down a highway in Mexico, and I'd have the camera up, have that thing going on behind me, and then, if I needed to pan or tilt a little bit, I'd reach in my jacket and it has a little joystick thing on it, and like turn that. And then watching in my phone. And I tried to set the settings before, like we'd usually stop to get everything set up and try to get the exposure and everything before that. And then once we would get rolling, I'd hit record and then direct them over the Bluetooth headset as we were rolling. Yeah.
My brain hurts right now.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It was fun.
That's amazing.
It's fantastic.
It was like playing piano, like,
and keeping your eyes on the road.
Yeah. And trying not to die. Yeah.
Trying not to.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun. We got
that's a DJI ad right there.
Having a drone too was a huge game changer. I mean, the kind of shots that like you'll see in the first episode, like the first shot is them ripping along the beach from like I forget how high it was, but I just tilt down and from they're on the beach along the Mexican coast, and that's like the first shot, and that's a drone shot. And it's just so cool that tool allows you to incorporate shots that would take like a helicopter, and especially for landscapes, as amazing as Baja, where it's just you get a different feeling when you see it from the air, just with all the cactus and the Sea of Cortez and all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
that is so cool.
That's incredible.
I remember I remember you sharing clips when you were on that trip. So some of these, I have visuals for, but we need to go watch the. We'll link to the channel in the podcast episode too, so we can hopefully some other people will go take some time to look at that.
That's the intro to this episode, by the way. That stressed me out so much. I love it.
Yeah, it was fun.
Oh,
you come up with new ways, because I had never seen anyone. I looked online to see if anyone had done that exact setup, and I've seen people like suction cup the DJI Osmo to like cars and stuff like that, but I hadn't seen it on a bike, you know, on a motorcycle. And you know, I was looking for ways to either like hard mount it or whatever. And so I was riding. They were both on, for motorcycle people out there, they were both on Indian Scouts, and then I was on the Indian or Chieftain. I think it was Chieftain that year. So it was like 2000. I think that was the newer one, so like the 2019.
That was more of a bagger, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It was a heavy bike. I tipped it over in Texas in the hill country because I was trying to like turn around in the middle of the road to get a shot, and I wasn't going fast. I was just turning around, but when it starts to go, you can't pick it up. And like I tried to pick it up, and traffic obviously stopped because I was in the middle of the road, and so a guy got out of his truck and helped me pick it up. But that was a heavy bike. But we did take it on the beach in Baja, so there's footage. You'll see, like, again, the opening shot in the first episode is them riding on the beach, and a shot from about 2 feet off the ground, and them doing the intro to the episode over their Bluetooth. So I would sync it in post, and that was because I rode the Big Chief out on 800, 900 pound motorcycle out onto the beach, and was riding it on the beach with them.
Was that sketch?
Getting out there was sketch. Once you get on the hard pack stuff, you're fine. But there were a couple squirrely parts where, like, I'll have to show you a picture where my rear wheel sunk in. So I call it a dirt kickstand, because it was so low that the bike just sat there. I hopped off and
kicksand.
Yeah. So I gotta put
my dad jokes. They're just
your dad jokes are on point today.
Okay.
I love that. What I love about this whole thing is that all these stories about films they're some of the more in-depth, inspiring stories that I've heard so far on this getting to know people on this podcast. But I love that you started this out with, I didn't go to film school. And then you dive into, these are incredible filmmaking stories that
and you're out there solving problems.
You're out there solving problems. Mm-hmm. I'd never seen someone do this on a motorcycle. No, you never have. And now you have. Oh man, that is so
cool.
So
if anybody's trying to make a film on a motorcycle, they've got some insight how they can get.
Oh, it's so cool.
Well, the technology is changing so quickly too. I mean, there's the Osmo. Was it the mobile or nano or whatever that one? That thing looks amazing. One of the problems I ran into with the Osmo one that I had was the motors weren't strong enough. Once you got over 35 mile an hour, the wind would overpower the motors, and then the thing would go like that. Yeah. And so you had to keep your speeds between 35 and 40 max. I tried to put it in like the draft of the bike so the wind wouldn't affect it as much, but there wasn't as much flat area back there for the suction cups, and the last thing I wanted to do was have that thing dragging along the road, because asphalt will tear up equipment fast.
Oh, absolutely.
But,
that's one of the reasons we bought. So we were doing a lot of car ads. We're not right now, but when we were focusing on some car ads, we bought the Ronin 2 because we thought we knew we're going to put a big camera on here. We have an FS7 with heavy lenses. Mm-hmm. And if we ever went bigger than that, we would like to have the payload capacity. And then we also thought, well, if we're going to hang out the side of a car for all these running car shots, because, similar to what you're doing, we don't have a crane. We don't have this huge vehicle with a crane on it. So we're just going to I put a climbing harness on. Mm-hmm. We were borrowing it from Cameron Hotchkiss, who's been on here. Climbing harness on, I strap into the back of our pickup, and I just hang out the back with this Ronin and a camera on it. Yeah. And so we figured we might as well pay attention to the payload and the wind speeds, and the Ronin had better wind speed. It could go up to 70 miles an hour. It could handle up to 70 miles an hour.
Nice.
As opposed to a Movi. So we were thinking of all that, but because we just made that huge jump, we've never dealt with it crashing on us in the middle, or just the motor's given up in the middle of it. So to hear that, an Osmo, just the fact that an Osmo would die in the middle of the wind, that gives me confidence that we made a good decision when we do the.
It became known as the flaccid gimbal.
Yeah,
because it would go flaccid, and they'd be riding behind me and like, Nathan, your gimbal's flaccid.
I love it. It's so cool though that you can you're able to get these shots that you'd have to have a helicopter, and you'd have to have a whole team with a running vehicle to get all these shots. Yeah. And you're out there like one-man band, getting beautiful aerial shots and getting driving shots. And you can do that all just from your bike, and you're out there experiencing this with them.
Yeah, and we tried to. We probably didn't do a very good job of like letting people know that it was only the 3 bikes. You know, that was a choice we made early on in the series, because you're like, well, should I rent a car? You know, because there are times when it would be easier, like in inclement weather. We didn't hit weather. We actually lucked out in weather. The only time we hit weather was like in Texas. We hit hail. I had to go under an underpass because the hail was that bad. And that would have been nice to have a car to duck into. But again, it kind of takes away from the experience. It's like, you know, how much are you really putting yourself out there in the adventure of it if you have a giant, you know, chase like production van to go sit in while it's raining outside? And I get there's, you know, other series where the stakes are higher. So, you know, where, you know, if you have like an exact certain amount of days and you have to get, you know, this done in that amount of time, I can see how like a chase van makes sense, right? Because the stakes are higher. You got, you know, I'm sure the budgets are higher, and you know, people are getting paid to be there, and so I get that, you know. But for us, I mean, we had probably the luxury of time, I would say, you know, because we spent an average of like 10 days per episode, which is, you know, it's a lot of time. Because I think for if you watch the ride with Norman Reedus, that series, you can tell they're shooting that over like 3 days, because the first 2 days they do, you know, these things, and the third day is when they hire the drone guy, because you don't see drone footage until day 3, and so you can always tell that. I was like, oh, it's probably like a 3 day shoot, you know, and that's, you know, what they have, because like everyone's getting paid to be there. So for us,
you can do the math on that.
So yeah, it's weird. I know you guys talked about it before, like watching something and like going into that diagnostic mode, you know, but it's hard to turn that off. But when you've been there and you've like tried to figure out those problems, and you wonder how many people are on salary and who, you know, they have on staff to get to handle what and all that kind of stuff. I always think about that when I watch these shows on, like,
that's awesome,
on Netflix or whatever. But
yeah, that's very cool. Gosh. So, was that your last project with Indian?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, they has since moved on from that, and they were like getting the mode. They had Travis Pastrana. They did that really big promo, and so we're hoping to do more. We want to keep the perpetual motion thing going, whether you know, whether it's with a OEM manufacturer, or maybe we self-fund it in some way, or get like partial funding through gear, whatever, you know, gear brands, you know, different stuff. But
I'd go on the next one, get on a Scout. I do like the Scouts. Those are cool bikes.
Yeah, they're fun. The Scout Bobber, I drag raced that in Atlanta.
Did you really?
Yeah, so part of our third episode was we met like the god of drag racing, motorcycle drag racing, in Atlanta, and he's like something like 10 or 11 time world champion. And again, Justin knew him through a previous project where they were Ricky Gadsden is his name, and the racer, and Justin knew him through doing a piece about the Ohio Mile. So there's an Ohio Mile where they get a runway and people can take, I think, just about any vehicle they want and run it down there and get its speed, get their speed measured, you know, in an official way. And so he knew Ricky from that, and so I just called, you know, Ricky up, and that was like one of our things that we did is like take these. We got a Indian bobber from, we got to borrow one, and so we had 2 Scouts and a bobber that day, and we drag raced all of them with these bikes that were like nitrous out, you know, like when you watch the footage, you'll see it was pretty absurd what we did, but it was a blast. Yeah,
we're gonna watch that. Okay, we are running out of time.
Were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say we're going to watch that. We're running out of time, though.
I have a couple things.
Okay.
This kind of ties into the Jordan Hallen episode.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to frame the question, but I'll just start with, you know, like how, since having a kid and getting married, how is that, like, has that affected you in your risk taking, you know, as a visual storyteller, or is this something like how does your wife feel about it?
She's okay with the motorcycle thing. Like we were just talking to somebody about this the other day, because he said he doesn't ride motorcycles anymore. And one of the things my wife and I, when we had our very first date, when we first started dating, it's like, we talked about deal breakers, because, we had met online. So we had, corresponded back and forth. And so, we were both looking not just for a girlfriend or boyfriend, but to, for somebody to potentially marry. And so obviously in the first date, deal breakers came up. And one of my deal breakers is like, I will never stop riding a motorcycle, because I've known so many guys, they get married and the girl falls for them because of the bike and they're the bad boy and all this kind of stuff. And then they get married and like, no, you need to be responsible now. You got people who depend on you, and like make him get rid of the bike. And for some people, maybe that's the right choice, but for me, it's like that would just gut me if I had to like stop riding. So I was like, that's something that's a huge part of who I am, and just like, the way that, I don't know, just like adventuring and getting out and like, it's because, not to go too much into like riding motorcycles, but it's such I don't know, it's such an alive experience, right? Because famously Robert Pirsig, right, in the art of motorcycle maintenance, he says riding in a car, everything is going through a frame. So it's like watching television, and you don't experience anything. It's just everything in a car is in a frame. Whereas in a motorcycle, it's like you experience it. So if it rains, you get wet. If it's cold, you get cold. If you're riding through a pine forest, you smell the pine. Like it's such a visceral experience, and you feel alive. And some of the most spiritual experiences I've had have been on the back of a motorcycle, riding through places like Yosemite, after a rain in New Mexico, smelling that sage, from a desert after the rain with the giant rainbow like over the road, like that kind of stuff. It's like I've never got that experience in a car. So bring that back to deal breaker, that was one of the deal breakers I had, and she was fine with it. And so we've kind of had that before we were even, at the beginning of our dating, like had that set up. So she knows that, I'm going to be riding, and she's okay with it. But I have, back to your question about taking risks, there've been times when I've like, things that I would have done probably when I was on the Circus just by myself, I probably wouldn't do now. And when we were filming too, like in Mexico, there was stuff is like, for the sake of the production, is this risk worth taking? One of it was like, each of those episodes had like a MO, and like, so the MO for the first episode was swim fins and surf mats. So he was trying to find a wave in Baja and had his surf mat and fins on the back of a motorcycle, and there were no waves on the days, and so it was like, trying to force him. It's like, well, does he go out and try to get a wave? Because it can be dangerous, if the surf is sloppy and stuff. You can get caught up if there's currents, and so like making those choices, like, well, if he gets hurt halfway through this shoot, then that's it. He goes home and we have no episode. Like we didn't have enough in the can to make an episode. Different stuff like that where you're making choices. But I will say I'm not as what's the right word? Not careless. You take calculated risks, yeah. And I would say I've dialed on the back of a bike, and I would say I've dialed those back, for sure. Yeah, since I've had a kid.
Yeah, I was just curious, hearing all these stories.
Yeah,
and I was like, for me, I rode a motorcycle for 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. I bought a Harley Street Bob, the Dyna, series, and
such a rad bike.
It was a sweet bike. I freaking loved it. And my wife and I started dating, and she would go on rides with me. I don't think her dad was too stoked on it, but she enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And then 2 weeks before we got married, her grandfather died riding the Hiawatha Trail, and fell in the tunnel, broke his neck, and it killed him.
Wow.
And he was just riding a bicycle. And so that was like, after that, I didn't ride the rest of that. We got married 2 weeks later, and that was an emotional period. And then I didn't ride that whole fall. The next summer, I rode a couple of times. I asked if she wanted to go on a ride. She went on a ride with me. It was the shortest ride. We drove one exit past we weren't even on the freeway. We just drove whatever that Saltese Way, or not Saltese Way, whatever past the state line.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got on the freeway at exit 1 just to drive back to state line. And like the second we were going over 35 miles an hour, she was emotional, and I was like, "Yep, I'm selling the bike." So that was my decision. That was like, it wasn't.
Yeah.
She didn't tell me to sell the bike.
Right.
I just knew.
Sure.
I just knew.
Yeah.
So, but I will say I remember, going on long rides to Winthrop and Leavenworth and all throughout the inland Pacific Northwest. Yeah. And those smells, I mean, you can't replicate it. I also have terrible experiences riding through the Palouse, and my allergies just flared up, and I'm just snot running down. I was the worst. But anyways, that being said, I hear you. That's probably one of the reasons why I asked. Yeah. We got a little more into like the emotional side of ourselves here at the end of the episode. So the people who quit listening,
you missed it.
Yeah, you don't care about us anyway. So,
this is Mototherapy podcast.
Mototherapy podcast. My wife is Mitch's sister, so she grew up with those motorcycles. Her dad rides. Both her brothers rode Harleys, and when we were dating, we both went and took our test and got our motorcycle endorsement together. And so I think I got into motorcycles because I married into this family, and we were on snow bikes up on 4th of July Pass, and I missed this turn, and I jumped off a cliff, and I hit a tree, and I broke my leg.
I remember
as her brother's driving me to the ER, they called her and said, "Sam's going to the hospital. Everything's okay." Her response was, "I hope this doesn't turn him away from motorcycles forever." So I still she doesn't remember saying that, but that's what she said to her brother on the phone. I hope this doesn't scare him away from motorcycles. So I've kind of held on to that's where this girl grew up, is with you guys, and that's what she has. I mean, we often go out to the family Montana cabin, and there's snowmobiles, and my wife wanted to take our son out on a snowmobile ride, and she asked me to go out and grab one of the snowmobiles and pull it up. And that was the first time I'd been on any sort of snow vehicle or a motorcycle vehicle, anything since. And I fired it up, and all I have to do is drive it out of the shop up to the front door, and it was weird. I drove it up and I parked it, and I was thinking, I don't know if I want to do this. And then it it's in the back of my mind again. My wife likes motor vehicles, and her husband crashed, and it's not going to stop her. I like that.
Yeah, they say the best thing is to get back on the bike after an accident. Like I had one early on, like, so I didn't ride before the Circus. That was like I got my I took my MSF course or whatever in Virginia, and then I actually had the first bike I bought, I had someone drive it back from the dealership for me because I was so green. It was a Ducati Monster 620 Dark.
Wow.
That would have been 2006, I guess. And the it was 2005. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They drove it back from the dealership because it's like I didn't feel confident yet on that bike to ride it back from the dealership, and sure enough, like a month into having that bike, a truck slammed down in Florida in Lakeland. A truck slammed on its brakes, and I should have just bailed in the ditch because there's just beautiful green grassy knoll off to the right. But being a new rider, your instinct is just to grab a handful of brake and hit it. And so I locked up the front wheel and the back wheel, went down on my side and under the back bumper. And I distinctly remember, like, standing up and the guy making eye contact with me in the rearview mirror. And then, like, he drove and it dragged the bike for a couple feet. And then the handlebars had folded under the bumper. And so the bike came free, and then he just, like, drove away. And so some people saw it happen, and they stopped and helped me. And even a police officer stopped too. And it's like, he asked why. It's like, should I press charges? And he was like, well, you could, but he's like, I was actually on the way to another call. He's like, if you press charges, he's like, I would have to give you a ticket because in the state of Florida, any rear end accident is the fault of the person behind, you know. And but I was like super shaken up, and I remember a friend of mine on the show. We were heading down to Tampa to see one of the other units, like the next day or a couple days after, and he had 2 bikes out with him on the show, so he let me ride his second bike, and I was like so scared because I had just had this accident, and he had a Ducati Monster as well, but a bigger one, like the 800, the S4R, S2R, whatever it was, and I was even more scared, but it got me out back on the bike again and like kind of conquering those fears, but it definitely messes with your head after you've had an accident, you know, because you're always thinking about that. My biggest fear now is like other drivers that are texting and deer. Those are my 2 biggest fears.
You know, we had a guy, I don't know, last summer, not this past summer, but the summer before, I think. Mm-hmm. They hit an elk, and yeah, it's my parents were supposed to be on a trip with 4 families, so it would have been 5 to go ride down in the Baja, and for whatever reason my parents didn't go, and one of the husband and wives, they were the trailing bike, and they were riding they were in the back, and a drunk driver passed all 3 bikes and then swerved into their lane and hit them head on, and the husband passed away. Husband died. The wife had to live through that. Anyways, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, I know I'm sure you know all the.
Yeah, I don't watch motorcycle accident videos on YouTube just because it's like,
no,
you don't need it.
Yeah, because that'll stay in your, like, especially being a visual person, and like I remember visual things, and like that just sticks in the back of your head. And they always say, like, you know, when you're riding, like look at the place that you want to go, not what's in front of you, because you'll go wherever you're looking. And so I feel like having that imagery in my head, also you're looking at all the things that could go wrong in a situation rather than like the safest direction, and so you focus on the things that could go wrong, and that will get you in an accident.
Absolutely.
So I stopped watching those videos because it's just, that messes with your head quite
Absolutely.
a bit. Yeah.
Last question.
Yep.
Who, in terms of filmmaking, who would you see as like inspiration? Like,
oh man, I made sure to like look this up so I wouldn't be like the deer in the headlights, because I know you guys ask this. I think for me it's mostly like DPs. So like, is it Emmanuel Luzbecki, or he goes by Chivo? Emmanuel Luzbecki. He's a DP. So he's done stuff like he works with Alfonso Cuarón a lot of it. So a lot of those movies, like New World, Revenant was one of his eye that he has for, like, him and Roger Deakins, I think, are the 2 that stand out to me as, like,
he did Birdman too, right?
So, yeah, Birdman. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love his way, just the way that he sees things and then decides to like frame them, and you know the way that he gives the viewer information through, you know, the way he frames things is just, it's something that I always enjoy. Yeah,
that's a beautiful answer.
Yep.
Yeah,
that guy understands blocking as well. Big time. Cool. I want to keep talking, but you got to go pick up your kid.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I would love to keep talking too. I mean, anytime you get around other people, I want to say filmmakers, but I can't.
No,
can I say it?
You can say it. You can say it. The reason we talked about that with Jordan is because we're so insecure about saying it.
Okay.
Because I feel like, I think that's at the end of the day, that's what it is for me when I we have a church small group, and anytime there's a new couple in there and they go around and introduce yourself, somebody's a pastor at the church, and somebody's a painter, a commercial painter, and somebody else is a fundraiser for a private school, and I'm a filmmaker. People are
and
like,
then there's questions.
Yeah. I get what you do, but like, what is that? I don't get that. And so I think saying filmmaker is, you gotta, I want to be confident in that. I do say cinematographer though.
You do?
Because for me, that's what I do. I like pictures.
Mm-hmm.
I am scared out of my mind if I have to run an interview without Mitch directing, because I want to make this picture pretty,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I don't know how to tell the story. I'm working on that. But
in the same.
I say I'm a cinematographer.
Yeah.
Confidently.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I mean, same thing for me when I'm running an interview and Sam's not there and I'm having to do camera, run camera, do camera, run camera and the interview at the same time. It's like, I don't even remember the questions I ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard, you were talking about building trust, when you're with friends, it's easy. They trust you, in terms of photography. The same thing in like conducting an interview. Somebody has to establish that trust and get them to open up.
Yeah.
And just get them to talk. And so for you to be, when you're doing it on your own, I mean, it's
hard.
It's hard. And any of us who have had to do that on our own as well.
And I think that's something that people don't understand when they like. I'm doing a series right now, testimonials for a client, and it's hard to explain to somebody that you have, because it's a skill set that I've got from just doing like through the coffee films and stuff, of like relating to people and finding ways to connect with that person before you even turn the camera on. And it's hard to relate that to a client, because there's no way you can say like, I'm a good people person, and, for a client to hire you. But I think once they either are on set or they talk to the people that you're interview, they'll understand that, that's part of what you're paying for, is that somebody who has that ability to connect. Because you can be, you can shoot stuff that's well lit and like and mic'd well and all that kind of, and framed well, but that doesn't mean you're gonna get a good interview out of it. The sound bites, like I'm sure you guys have experienced this too, where you'll sit down with somebody for a half hour or an hour, and the sound bite that you get is like in that last 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
That it's because you've had that 28 minutes or an hour of that person like talking to you, and that engagement and looking them in the eye, and that person subconsciously feeling like this is a safe person that I can open up to, and that they don't have an agenda that they're trying to pull one out, a fast one on me.
We get it in the first 2 minutes when they don't know the camera has like that we've pressed record.
Yeah.
Tape up the red light on our
the tally light.
I don't want anybody knowing that we're recording.
And we get so the first two, and then when they know the interview started, that's when things lock up. And then the last two, I find that I can ask a question, frame it differently 3 or 4 times in an interview because I want a certain answer out of them, and they kind of are reluctant on getting either emotional. Not that I want it to be hyper emotional, but I want to see some humanity, I guess, in the answer.
Yeah.
And then when we like kind of end the interview, that they just like talk. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they're like, and you get exactly the answer you wanted, and I didn't even ask a question at that point. They just it's having
humanity is a good word for that, because that's, you're not looking for the hyper emotional. You just want them to be a human, and when the camera's rolling, suddenly people are not human. They turn into something different.
Robots.
Yeah.
Taking over the world. And
Nathan,
you got to go, bud.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Yeah, this has been awesome. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Great way to spend an afternoon.
Yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
guys.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. The Cinetherapy podcast is produced by Inland Film Co. Special thanks to Nathan Slabaugh for joining us for a conversation on this podcast. We hope you go watch his films and get to know his work. If you are interested in connecting with Nathan, we listed his social media accounts in the description of this page. We also linked off to Nathan's documentary series with Indian motorcycles called Perpetual Motion from West by 1000, and we highly recommend checking it out. That's a wrap.